we just killed Gallywix, but his real life character is still walking around. Now, we already talked about the fact that Gallywix could come back. Who knows? He had his whole thing with the brokers back in Shadowlands. It's the realm of death. He could be there right now planning his comeback. You know who else is planning his comeback? That's right, Bobby Kotick. He is not holding back. He's done a bunch of interviews. He's talking about Blizzard. He's talking about World of Warcraft. And he's talking about how he is going to make his big comeback. Let's see what Bellular has to say about all this.
Bobby Kotick stepped down from Activision just over a year ago, but now he's back and he's on a mission to rehabilitate his public image. And to achieve this mission, he needs vaguely friendly media, not unlike, say, this profile that Variety did on him right as Activision.
He is fucking Gallywix, man. He is Gallywix. Hold on, Gallywix. I know I pulled this up before, but I could not get over the fact that he is legitimately Gallywix. It's like so close that there's no way that this was an accident. Hold on, let me see. Maybe I can pull up that exact picture that I love putting side by side because it is so accurate in terms of who they are. Just like a little smile here. there's all these images of him. Yeah. No, it's a 1-to-1. I had the nose, the eyes, the little smile. Yeah, it's an exact match. It's an exact match. This was art imitating life.
This profile that Variety did on him right as Activision's reputation burned, complete with one of the most, hey, you can trust me looking photo shoots I think I've ever seen. But today, it's a venture capital firm's podcast. Yeah,
damn, he's lost a lot of weight.
So, the Bobster spent 2 hours explaining his take on things, his take on the last 30 years of Activision Blizzard. And what he chose to say is almost as interesting as what he didn't, what he minimized and what he glossed over. So let's be clear, this is not just any interview. This is literally Bobby Kotick surrounded by friends in his own home on a softball podcast. This is Bobby's shot at controlling, regaining the narrative.
That's
and there's
right.
an important piece of wisdom that comes to mind. It is that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. The point is, goals alone are not enough. It's systems that build and turn ambition into action and results, and that's where ClickUp, who are today's sponsor, come in.
Sponsor.
It is not just a project manager.
Real quick on Bobby Kotick, we all know about his history with Blizzard and Activision and everything else, and some people blame him for the fall of Blizzard after they purchased it and everything else. But one thing you got to know about Bobby is the shareholders always loved him, right? He bought Activision from basically ruin. Activision was like on the verge of bankruptcy when he bought them. He bought them for nothing, and he turned that shit around into one of the most valuable game producers in the stock market. He brought that stock from nothing back up. He purchased Blizzard, brought the value up so high that he was able to be purchased by Microsoft. What was it, for $64 billion, something like that? It's some insane number. So Bobby, in terms of being an asshole, yeah, he's an asshole. But is he also really good to shareholders? Yeah, he is. So he's got a good rep when it comes to that stuff.
Management tool. It is designed to let you build those systems that will keep
He's
you right
fasting
and
too,
hitting your
yeah,
goals.
or on Ozempic.
ClickUp gives you everything you need to get organized and stay productive. And that does mean tasks, projects, but also whiteboards, docs, internal
68.7
wikis,
billion.
so that you've got all the tools that you need in one platform. That's going to save you money and tools, save your organization and tools, but even better, they're all designed to work together, which means less context switching. That'll save you time, as will this, the automations. Those really tickle my brain because when you're using software, little bits of friction here and there just suck. So for an example, right, if I complete my recording task, it could then automatically update the project status and notify the right people, all without me having to do anything because it's built in an automation. That means all those clicks and repetitive little tasks simply get automated away so you can focus on what actually moves the needle. So
very nice.
To take your productivity to the next level, try ClickUp for free at tryclickup.co/BellularNews and use code BellularNews to get started. And if you love it, my code BellularNews gets you 20% off when you upgrade. All this happened on the Grit podcast, which is ran by venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins. They recently featured Kotick.
A venture capital firm running who the fuck would listen to this shit? Anyways, I guess investors and stuff. But I mean, talk about just evil interviewing evil. We got a venture capitalist run podcast interviewing Bobby Kotick. That's just double dipping right there.
They recently featured Kotick alongside an ex-EA executive and personal friend of Kotick's called Bing Gordon, and the host was basically there to...
An ex-EA executive? You know what EA's been known for? Fucking loot boxes. And how they've ran that shit through the trash. They've also kind of destroyed Star Wars games. EA is not a great shining light in terms of the gaming industry either.
Fill in the gaps and kind of gasp in awe at Kotick's business prowess.
Lizard people.
And I, for one, am glad because 2024 was a horrendously Bobby Kotick-free year. Within 3 months of his departure and, of course, his multi-$100 million parachute, wafted him away to safety, 1,900 staff got the axe, and we didn't really hear much from Bobby. And as someone who really did enjoy putting Bobby Kotick in video thumbnails, I kind of missed him. But now he's back, and I have a feeling the distance from that very large layoff is maybe part of why he waited. Now, big picture, Kotick uses this podcast to position himself as the visionary between franchises like Tony Hawk. He connects the dots between his personal network and business successes. For one example, take Tony Hawk. As the story goes, Bobby Kotick's brother-in-law was a talent agent who gave a job to a kid whose family shared a ski lodge.
Hey, hate on Bobby Kotick, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series was great. I played a ton of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater back in the day on Nintendo 64 and everything. Man, it was a good series. I enjoyed it. So, like I said, he's had good games come out from Activision while he was there.
With Kotick, and that kid's first client, Tony Hawk, who at that point was living out of his car. And this is the sort of story that Silicon Valley absolutely loves. Connections, wealth, opportunity, all converging together in what Kotick likely sees as an inspirational tale of his business
Well, I didn't know
acumen.
that, Monarch.
And that's the sort of story that's interesting, it's improbable, and it will stick in the mind. Maybe not your mind or my mind. I think other things come up first when we think about Bobby Kotick and Activision, but it will stick in the mind of the target audience, listeners of a venture capital firm's podcast, which, generally is probably not you and me. And for them, Bobby has got a very clear message, how his philosophy was a winning one. Kotick frames his management approach with some clear principles. So, according to Bobby, successful Activision projects needed to be globally appealing, have sequel potential, we've certainly seen that, rank first or second in their genre, and have the best technical and design talent for that genre. And what he does is he lays out...
One thing, though, that Bobby, he likes technical and design talent, but he didn't like to pay for it. And Blizzard was known for that for a long time. I'm not so sure about Activision. I would guess the same philosophy fell through the entire company. But they typically underpaid compared to industry averages. Now, one thing that they used a lot to leverage that underpay was like, hey, you are working for Blizzard. So like it was almost like fandom. Like people would take a fan discount to come work for a company that they just loved playing their games for. And he rolled with that a lot of times. He typically underpaid based on what the industry paid, and he got away with it for a long time. Now there's a union over there and everything, so we'll see how long that shit works. Also, they're under the Microsoft umbrella now, so they're probably all salaried based on what Microsoft pays, which is not under industry standards. But for Bobby, it certainly was.
How this basically guided internal development and acquisitions, but he does end up drawing quite a clear line, and I hope you've got an eyebrow that's ready to raise at a moment's notice, because per Bobby, as long as those guidelines were followed, things were good. Management would get their independence. But through the interview, there's a kind of clear implication between...
That's a shot at Blizzard. He's saying that's a shot at Blizzard. He didn't believe that they were following his guidelines, and that's why he came in and basically took over after they had absorbed them.
Everything, really. Whenever studios failed, it was their fault, because they had been given freedom. Basically, freedom to not adhere to the winning philosophy. And to me, this whole thing kind of appears to be an exercise in taking as much credit as is possible, whilst deflecting as much blame as is possible. And one example of that is Bizarre Creations. They were the developers of Project Gotham Racing, which, if you were around a little while ago, you'll remember
this.
But, it's not really a thing now for a reason. Kotick calls the acquisition of that studio a, quote, expensive lesson, and he blames management. Now, what he conveniently neglects is...
What a fucking asshole, man. Like, he's literally the thing that you hate about a CEO, when they never take blame for anything. He's blaming management. Nice.
What
Can't
he
be Bobby's fault.
conveniently neglects is mentioning how much Activision's own strategic demands contributed to that studio's failure, after 22 years of being successful. And it's kind of typical of a big pattern in that earlier era of publishing, right? You had the likes of Activision and I think most notoriously EA, Rip Westwood and so on, running studios into the ground.
Right, right. It can't. There's no. The common denominator. They would absorb these companies, monetize the shit out of them, and then the company would die. Next company shows up even after 20 years of success, gets absorbed, run into the ground, and dies. There's a common theme here. They tried to do it with World of Warcraft and Blizzard. Who knows? Maybe the Microsoft acquisition ends up being its saving grace at the end of the day when we look back at it and how it all played out. But we all know where World of Warcraft was heading for a long time under Activision. It was being run into the fucking ground. So there's a common denominator here. But Bobby will look around and say, no, not me. I'm not that common denominator. It can't be me.
Bizarre Creations is just one example.
Friggin' narcissist.
What's kind of funny is how Bobby only dropped that example because the podcast host actually fluffed him up unrealistically as having a, quote, flawless mergers and acquisitions record, which does kind of give away the game, doesn't it? Now, Bobby handled this softball real well because he responded with a failure, but a failure that was very much in the past, where he framed it with humility and he conveyed a lot of wisdom and lessons learned. Knowing what I know from years of coverage, this just feels really, really goddamn slimy. And from now on in the video, you'll begin to notice something more and more. Bobby's dodges and his parries really do become beyond obvious. And, I mean, for obvious reasons for me, I can't wait to get to the Blizzard stuff. But first, the whole Vince and Jason Call of Duty thing, because how Bobby handled that, well, it's quite something. Normally I'd say that nothing reveals Kotick's revisionist tendencies more than his framing of the Infinity Ward leadership crisis, but I'm not going to say that because I know what's coming later in this video. And this is a good example, but it's not the best example. Anyway, Infinity Ward. When discussing Vince Zampella and Jason West, the founders who of course were fired in a very dramatic and public fashion, Kotick frames their departure as being quite predictable. Here's the quote: "It's not like we didn't know they did it to you," speaking to the other exec who was from EA. "So we figured at some point they were going to do it to us, right?" So the you here is EA. It is indeed Bobby talking to his co-host, a former EA exec. And if you are the typical listener of Grit, a Kleiner Perkins podcast, you'll pretty much think that's that Vince and Jason were fired for breach of contract and insubordination, simple as they're kind of pirate bandits and they're ripping off their corporate masters or something. But here's the thing, right? Bobby saying they did that to you is honestly kind of wild because, Activision poached them from Electronic Arts. So, yes, they did leave Electronic Arts, moving to Activision, a thing facilitated by Activision. So to be clear here.
So basically he was a thing facilitated by Activision. So he purchased them knowing that he had plans to fire them before he purchased them. So this was already a conversation that he had in his own head, had maybe with the head honchos around him, and talked about, okay, these guys over at Infinity Ward, we're going to buy them, and eventually we're going to push their leadership out as well. We're going to take their game away. That's what he already had this all planned out before he even purchased them. I wonder if he worked that into the purchase price as part of the negotiations. Like, hey, we know your shit. These guys are they're not easy to work with in terms of following orders and not going their own direction. So we're going to buy this company from you, but we're going to fire these guys, so we need a discount because we're going to have to run it ourselves.
Activision. So to be clear here, Activision's poaching of these two from EA is framed as being why they would later be fired for breach of contract and insubordination. Who knows? Maybe the geopolitical espionage plots of Call of Duty just got to Bobby's head and it's a whole, we can't trust the turncoat informant style thing. Maybe it's that. But what I'd more go to is what's being left out here. The stuff that the podcast listeners will not know about, which is the lawsuit that followed from Vince and Jason, where they alleged that they were fired to avoid paying them out Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 royalties, and there's a bunch of other things there.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Activision actually did end up paying out. We don't know how much. It was through a settlement. And of course, because it was a settlement, we don't have the details. But
now, look, here's the thing about a settlement, right? Coming from a lawyer. It's not an admission of guilt necessarily, but because it could just be it's a cost-effective thing to do. That's what happens a lot of times with these companies. You look at how much it's going to cost you to litigate to the finish line, and even if you know you're right, even if you're 100%, we're going to win this thing, you got to do a cost-benefit analysis. You got to look at it and say, well, it's going to cost us X million of dollars to litigate this to the finish line, or we can just settle it for this smaller amount of dollars. At the end of the day, if you're going to win but you're going to lose money, you're not winning. So that's what it's all about. So sometimes they'll just pay it out. Now, does this? It could also be that they were guilty and they knew they were going to lose the case, so they decided to settle on it. Now, which do I think is the truth here? It's probably that they were guilty, but they knew that settling would be the better thing to do here, because then they've essentially kicked him out of the company, and now they can run this shit into the ground, right? They can just monetize the shit out of it and go the direction that they wanted to go, because I would have bet that Jason and Vince did not want to monetize the shit out of Call of Duty and create this this track of seasonal content loot box stuff that for sure Bobby was pushing as soon as they absorbed him.
Settlement. And of course, because it was a settlement,
it's also
we
to
don't
save
have
face,
the details. But suffice to say, there's a story
Sam, you don't know
there,
shit about
whatever
litigation.
it is,
Shut up, true.
Mr. Kotick was keen to brush past a lot of
You're going to get served
texture.
soon, Cadence.
Okay, next, let's change tack. Because this story was peak Bobby dodging. Next, we have Bobby, the savior of Blizzard Entertainment. During the interview, Bobby reminisces to when Vivendi came on board with 25 in-development projects, and he's...
Reputation matters, yes. I'm sure I'm sure there was an NDA signed and everything else with this settlement. So yeah, they're not allowed to talk about anything when it came to the settlement. Yeah.
Said the only one that made money was WoW. And of course, pruning down from loads of projects to just a few ones that really do work, that would be Bobby's MO. And there's a fun snippet too, by the way. Bobby basically said that he was worried that people would age out of World of Warcraft because it took, quote, 4 hours a day to be competitive. That's kind of funny. It wouldn't be proven true. But then he did get to something quite, close to the bone for players, because it's a sub fee. According to Bobby, he rejected plans to increase World of Warcraft subscription price. And he said that instead, he basically said this: come up with value-added services, come up with more things to sell, but leave the price. It was a prickly audience. You don't want to agitate that audience.
Actually a smart move. Actually a fucking... Yeah, we're saying Bobby's an idiot. At the same time, actually a smart move. Not because he... By the way, don't get me wrong. He didn't do this because he wants to save that. He doesn't want to charge the customer more money. To him, monetization in another way was going to make him more money rather than increasing the sub fee by X amount of dollars. So yeah, he knew that maybe increasing the sub fee would lead to, people leaving the game for whatever reason. He said, okay, leave that sub fee alone. Don't increase it. Just keep it as like, that is our floor on how much Blizzard can make out of World of Warcraft. Now, let's add more shit on top of that. Let's put mounts on a mount store. Let's do all this stuff. Put some transmog, do all this shit, and start making money on top of the sub fee, because that is infinite. $90 store mount, hey, that's a lot. That's a lot of subs right there. So, actually freaking smart move. Like I said, we can hate Bobby, but we really can't say he's dumb when it comes to business. He knows how to extract money right out of your pocket. He is Gallywix. That's right. He knows.
Bobby was absolutely right. The
Hence
hardest
the WoW
part of
token
doing
too,
a free-to-play game is turning players into payers. If you've got a sub-fee MMO, everyone is a payer. So keep them being payers. Don't change the status quo and milk them on upcharges, which, World of Warcraft's pretty good at doing.
Yeah, that's right, Cadence.
But as we all know, as the years rolled on, right, as it went from Wrath of the Lich King and forward, World of Warcraft began to struggle. The subscribers did begin to leave, so much so that they actually stopped reporting subscriber numbers.
Yeah.
So now we've got to come to Bobby's role in saving World of Warcraft. And really it all centers around Chris Metzen. Chris acted as creative vision holder for the core Blizzard Entertainment IPs, and he began to burn out through the 2010s. Now, he'd been going for a long, long time, right? Since the 90s, he found himself juggling Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft, and Overwatch, books, comics, all the stuff. And in this interview,
And back then, Overwatch wasn't MMO, it was Project Titan. So that shit was just drained the crap out of him.
See Bobby attach himself to Metzen. He calls Metzen, quote, the heart and soul of creativity at the company. And Bobby really, really lays it on thick. And it gets kind of dramatic. Bobby blames the Warcraft movie, which he called, quote, one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Jesus.
Come on, Bobby, there's worse movies than that.
There's definitely
You'll have a lot of
worse.
fun if you watch them. Anyway.
The Warcraft movie just tried to be too many things at once. It tried to tell too many stories. It really just, it tried to lay the groundwork essentially for more movies to come instead of just telling a singular story. I've said it before, the Warcraft movie should have just been the story of Arthas Menethil to start. And then you could have branch out prequels and all kinds of shit that happened before and after that. But the story of Arthas is really easy to for people to relate to, even if someone doesn't know the story of World of Warcraft at all, or Warcraft in general. You can relate to the story of a prince who tried to do the right thing for his people, went too far, fell into evil, and then was eventually, killed. Okay, the story of Darth Vader and shit, like same shit. So that would have been an easy one for them to go with. Yes, the Warcraft movie, though, I'm sure did drain Chris Metzen for sure.
Blames that for Metzen's burnout and departure, and he says that delayed.
Chris Metzen also claims it's the worst movie he's ever seen. Did he? I don't remember ever seeing that. Maybe, I don't know.
And expansions. Now, big picture, that might feel odd to some of the media covering this story because they will say, look at World of Warcraft on Wikipedia, they'll see that it's still shipped basically an expansion every 2 years. But from being very close to that game for a very long time, well, we know that internally they had pushed for yearly expansions and clearly failed, and their production woes, they caused major content droughts, like the end of Mists of Pandaria and the end of Warlords of Draenor. Now, Chris Metzen retired in 2016. That was just before the Warcraft movie launched, it was just after the Legion expansion launched. And to say that World of Warcraft would go on to struggle in his absence would be to put it lightly. Now, to be very clear, game design is not the thing that Chris Metzen works on. It's not like he's to blame for Azerite armor or Covenants and Shadowlands, right? The point is, though, that the creative direction for both Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands suffered immensely. I could say so much more about that, but I'd bore you to tears because you're not here for arcane WoW lore and details. Basically, the writing was on the wall to many of us, and while Dragonflight as a video game was a vast improvement, it was still narratively uneven. It basically was not a concept that would bring WoW players back.
Yeah, certainly this Dragonflight's story and lore was the weak point of that expansion. It was, the let's be friends, we're all going to go tip to tip and rub to rub on each other this entire expansion. The coolest thing to come out of Dragonflight was Iridikron, and he still exists now in the game. Other than that, Dragonflight really was a systems expansion. It laid out the new talent system, gave us a bunch of new systems, implemented, click to hold type of abilities through the Drakthir and stuff like that, redid the crafting system, introduced dragon riding. Like, it was a systems expansion, and for that, Dragonflight was really good, laid a good foundation, hopefully, for the World Soul Saga going forward. But again, the weak point of Dragonflight was, the lack of Chris Metzen. The story was just kind of like, what are we doing here? What's going on? Why did we even show up to the Dragon Isles? Okay, we're lighting up these torches. What the fuck? What? Why? Do we even know why we did that anymore? I don't know. It's a forgettable story. That's the thing about Dragonflight.
Now, in our story, the year is 2022, and that is when Bobby was
it was
about
also
to
your
make
first.
a
Yeah,
move.
you'll always be biased to your first expansion.
Here's how Bobby Kotick helped save World of Warcraft. According to Bobby, Metzen's 2022 return started when, quote, the guy who used to run World of Warcraft reached out to Metzen, who then called Kotick for advice. I think he's referring to Jonathan Haidt. Doesn't really matter for this story, but I think that's the guy he's talking about. Now, supposedly, Chris Metzen reviewed the upcoming expansion plans, and Metzen declared, they're not good, man, they need to be redone. Kotick then says that he encouraged Chris to return and to fix them. Now, Bobby does say that he hardly talked to Metzen after the return, but the point here basically is that Bobby kind of helped get Chris Metzen back to Blizzard Entertainment.
Of course.
And in the context of today's story,
I actually think Chris Metzen came back because he knew Bobby was leaving. I think he knew about the whole Microsoft thing that was going down. At least he knew because they may have told him. I guarantee you they made him sign an NDA before any of these conversations happened, so he couldn't have talked about it. But I have a feeling that, they kind of laid out the future of the company, where things were going, and he just probably saw that, okay, we're getting purchased by Microsoft. Bobby's probably leaving. I'm gonna get more creative freedom here. You know what? Fine, I'll come back.
This really is consistent. It's Bobby positioning himself as spotting talent, fostering talent, and that when things go a bit wrong, the fault lies down the chain.
I didn't watch the interview, no.
He was able to get Metzen back and sort of save the situation. Now, for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what two expansions that were being, talked about here. And I will say that is not a confirmed quote from Chris Metzen. That is an alleged thing that he said. Now, it does happen to line up with things that I have heard on the grapevine. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And if it is a true quote, well, I absolutely do think it was right. The expansion concepts that they were going to go with were really not going to be good for bringing players back. Anyway, World of Warcraft today is in a much more healthy position, but for today's story, well, it's late 2022, and you know what that means. It's the acquisition. So
Yeah,
with
we are,
Activision
Josh.
being the absolute titan that it is, why would Bobby Kotick sell to Microsoft? Well, according to Bobby,
Is that a real question? Why would he sell to money? Money. That's what he's always been about. It's always been about money. He brought up the company to its highest valuation possible, and he sold to a big boy that can sell. Bobby made a shit ton of money out of this deal. Yeah, he never cared about the games industry. He cared about building up shareholder value, building up the valuation of the company, eventually dumping it.
right?
And he did a good job in
pressures
doing that.
forced his hand. An influx of companies like Apple, Amazon, and Meta stealing talent, driving wages up, and Chinese competitors exploiting Western developers. Bobby tells a whole fascinating story about how the deal originated from a failed TikTok acquisition by Microsoft in 2020 with the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, who is...
Yeah, this whole thing came up with a TikTok acquisition when the whole TikTok is a Chinese spy, app, and basically the U.S. government was going to force the sale of the American version of TikTok, and Microsoft was the leader in terms of purchasing it.
Is Bobby's high school buddy basically connecting a bunch of dots. And supposedly the way it goes is that Kotick actually called Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella about a TikTok partnership, but Nadella declined. He did though suggest, talking to Activision if the TikTok deal failed. And of course,
and it
2
did.
years later, they did talk. And within the space of just 3 days, they seemingly hammered out a deal for the acquisition. However, that is what Bobby sort of frames as being the main timeline for the acquisition. What's perhaps a little bit missing from this neat timeline is the avalanche of harassment allegations and state investigations that rocked the company beginning 2021.
He forgot about that shit, right? Bobby forgot to mention that stuff.
Now, to be clear, Bobby does talk about those things in the interview.
Oh, he
but
does?
not
Okay.
in the context of the deal. And really, the point there is, it seemed that Bobby's position was untenable, that company health was going in a really, really bad place,
Yeah.
and that he was left with a pretty weak set of cards in his hand, meaning that he ended up in
Time
a
to sell.
position where he was, looking rather acquirable.
Yeah.
Now, there's other things that Bobby dodges in this interview, like the reported conflict between him and the NetEase CEO William Ding that supposedly contributed to the collapse of the Blizzard Games deal in China, which, meant nope.
Yeah, the fact that the partnership with NetEase in China was restructured after Bobby left, not a coincidence. That was the main gripe. Bobby had a complete fallout with their CEO, NetEase's CEO, and he was like, "Fuck this deal, I'm not doing it." He didn't give. That was probably one of the few money smart moves that Bobby ever made. Literally, his pride took over to the point where he axed a deal that caused them to lose millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even billions, in China. And that was because of his ego. His ego got way too big at that point.
Blizzard Games in China for a while.
That yacht caught fire.
Of course, rather ironic given his complaints about the Chinese market difficulties. Given, he was
Probably
working
also made him want to
Chinese
sell
market,
even more.
They have Diablo Immortal with NetEase. Anyway. For peak revisionism, though, we've got to see his take on the lawsuit. Because you can never be too sure these days, rather than the full word, I'm just going to say actual harassment. XUAL, actual harassment, that whole case. So Bobby frames that, the internal staff positions and estate investigation, as a manufactured union attack orchestrated by the Communication Workers of America.
Of course.
He even says it's personally offensive to me. And that bit's a quote. So yeah, I suppose I'm imagining, the Teamsters, the mob, there's people getting murdered, crazy. No, it's not that. It's basically...
I guarantee you Bobby believes the shit he says, too. The bullshit he says about, they had it out for me and this is some kind of liberal shit where they're coming for me so they can unionize. Guaranteed he actually believes the shit he said, and he completely believes that he was innocent. Allegedly.
Basically just him saying, they were all out to get us. He calls the lawsuits filed by the EEOC and the California DFEH as being fake and orchestrated purely to help unions recruit more members. His friend Gordon then chimes in with an unsubstantiated claim that similar tactics were used against another company. Bobby then goes on to distance himself from the uncomfortable meat of the story by kind of saying he's a bit of a workplace hero, right? He basically said this. Well, actually, this is a quote. When I heard about, things that were inappropriate conduct in the workplace, I just fired people, on the spot. That is a quote from Bobby. Now, this whole framing conveniently ignores some things like the $18 million settlement with the EEOC and extensive reporting by the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg that did appear to confirm, with lots of different sources, widespread misconduct across the company and suggested that it was known about up the chain of command. And the settlements came with money specifically set aside for restitution to female staff who suffered from discriminatory practices.
Yeah,
now,
of course.
To be clear,
if you're gonna, these kinds of things are coming out. They're coming. These companies will budget for it. It's a budget thing. Like it's literally comes down to the cents and the dollars at the end of the day for all of them. And so they're like, yeah, we got the sexual harassment shit. Get the legal team on this. Get the finance team on this. How much do we need to set aside in our budget? And we'll recalculate our profits for the year and end game and all that shit. And we got an expansion launching. Okay, we're going to make this much predictability, all this stuff. Okay, yeah, we'll set aside this much and we'll just settle with these people. Yeah, easy. Done. Case closed.
these were settlements. Nothing was proven.
There's no human emotion involved in it. That's it. It's just a money game.
Public court, where as an example there could be a discovery phase, which is of course when documents, emails, all of that stuff legally would have to be handed over.
Yeah.
So none of that stuff happened because it was a settlement.
Right.
Nothing was proven in court, and per the final statement from the government bodies, I'll quote, "No court or independent investigation has substantiated any allegations, and that the defendants deny all allegations of wrongdoing, liability, and damages."
Yeah, of course. You want to settle before this shit happens, right? You don't want an independent investigation, all that stuff, or a court to get involved. You got to settle before any of that happens. And the settlement, by the way, when they bring it to them, there are phases to the settlement where they say if you settle before we go to court, you get this much. If you make us go to court, you get this much. If you actually go through, so they're looking at it, and they'll tell them it's going to cost you this much to actually go to court with us, and all. So the person who's settling at the end of the day, a lot of times they're going to take it. Why are they going to go out through this fight? And by the way, even if they know they're going to win, this shit could drag out for years. I mean, they might not see the money for 15 years, 20 years, whatever. They could just drag this shit out, keep doing a bunch of stuff to make this case take forever. So you're just probably going to settle at the end of the day and take the money and leave.
Of wrongdoing, liability, and damages. How do we think about that? Well, basically, it's fair to say this. It ends with the defendants continuing to deny any wrongdoing in this whole affair, and it is agreed that no court or external investigation has proven wrongdoing. That's what the settlement ultimately agrees to. Kotick, this is a bit goofy, but he even argues that because he was dating Sheryl Sandberg at the time, she co-led Meta with Mark Zuckerberg, and she wrote this book called Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. And that kind of meant that it would be a bit weird and hypocritical for him to know about these problems and not resolve them, because look at who he's dating and the book that she's put out. And he even claims that he showed her their pay equity filings for...
What a ridiculous statement. Yeah, I'm pounding somebody right now who's all about women's rights, so I wouldn't put my pipe in something and then go the opposite direction in real life. No way, clearly. Yeah, so that's the best way. I don't know why my accent became Southern there, but that's clearly, you want to get out of something, make sure you pound the thing that is antithetical to what people are accusing you of. That's a great strategy, Bobby. Yeah.
Consultation. So yeah, this is kind of the my ex-girlfriend defense.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I get it. Maybe he's bringing it up for a bit of storytelling.
It's almost like I'm not racist. I got friends that are black. That's literally what he's doing. He's doing the same thing. I'm not sexist. I'm dating a woman. What are you talking about?
Telling texture, but given the seriousness of all of this, it does come across as a bit odd. Now, through all of this, you're probably wondering, why is Bobby doing this? If you're him, why not go and enjoy your multi-$100 million golden parachute? Well,
there's a thing about CEOs, and you will learn this if you ever work in corporate America. It's not about the money. These CEOs have infinite money. They will never spend the interest on their money. They have earned generational wealth. It becomes an ego stroke game. It's like a challenge. It's like logging into WoW every day. They're logging into this company every day. And every day, it just gets them high. First of all, the power gets them high. The fame gets them high. And it's just an ego game at the end of the day for them. The money is not the reason.
Let us lay waste to this realm.
The Nitrogen, thank you for the follow. Welcome to our Scourge.
Here's what we can put together about the future of Bobby
Because greed
Kotick.
is a mental illness.
Of his
yeah.
options, the most tangible appears to be him taking another shot at running TikTok. This is judged by how he claims he can set
use
up a potential.
another
Nitro, thank you for the prime sub, man. I appreciate that. Death Knight of our Scourge. Bobby taking over TikTok. Oh my God. Every 10 scrolls is going to cost you 10 cents or something.
Deal. Now, the deep
boxes
why
and
is
TikTok.
anyone's guess, and it's always tricky and sometimes irresponsible to go into that. I mean, it could be as simple as he just enjoys running companies. That would fit what he did in his 20s, and
Cadence, I don't disagree with that. A lot of times, if the CEO is like the original founder, and yeah, the company maybe is not like this massive conglomerate, or I'll say one thing that typically leads to greed or corruption is going public. A lot of times, like these companies that are not public yet, if you don't know, by the way, Discord is one of those companies right now that is supposedly looking to go public. And right now, a lot of people are up in arms about it because they don't want it to happen. Because once you go public, you have a legal fiduciary duty to your shareholders to make as much money as possible. That is literally legally. That is legally your obligation. So before you go public, that's not it. You can make the company whatever you want it to be. You can make intentional decisions that are just better for your employees and not necessarily going to make you more money. In fact, they'll make you lose money. But once you go public, you are not allowed to do things like that anymore. You could literally get fired you could lose your company via a shareholder vote if you make decisions like that. So you got to understand if it's not a publicly traded company. Yeah, fiduciary is a pretty big word. You read, right? Yeah, sometimes I use those words. As I was saying, if you're not a publicly traded company, maybe the founder is the CEO. Yeah, typically you'll see better behavior out of a CEO in that case.
the story of young Bobby Kotick is one I'd like to tell sometime. It's
Discord,
kinda
I don't know if it's going to end up
also,
happening.
you could say he's an
Probably
older,
will.
powerful man, and often to that cohort, legacy matters a lot. But the truth is, we don't know what's going on in his brain. All we can really do is look at his actions and his words. And what we can say is that he went on Grit, a venture capital firm's podcast that was recorded in his own home with people that he knows.
The nitrogen, my takes are so on point. Thank you. Yeah, you work for a Fortune. Yeah, I work for a Fortune 25 company as legal counsel. So yes, I have a slight insight into how these things work.
He's very much framed his legacy in terms of an ability to find a winning vision and to pick winning talent, while very much downplaying his losses and explaining them. So he is a skilled, experienced, worldly man ready for life's next challenge. And you know all that noise? Lawsuits and Californias? That's just the Matrix out to get one of the world's true protagonists.
That's right.
And if you'd like to be, be got and actually have a really interesting video, well, I think you should watch this one next. Hope you had fun. I'll see you next time.
Big. Yeah, nice. Great video, man. I love watching shit like this, getting really digging deep into the stories behind the games and what's happening, because at the end of the day, the games industry is just another for-profit industry. So there's all kinds of corruption and bad shit going down. I mean, it's not just the tobacco industry or the oil industry that you see stuff like this in. It's every for-profit industry. Damn, that music just kicked high. A great video from Bellular and Bobby Kotick planning his return, boys. We will see Bobby again. That is a promise for sure. Linking that in the video. Linking that in the chat. Great video from Bellular.